Precision 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
Every story begins with a single moment. In 2014, from Ukraine to Islamic State, from the federal budget to the Ebola epidemic, each story began with a single, sometimes almost insignificant moment with ultimately far-reaching impacts. In 2014, we watched those moments and those stories became history.
What authorities are really concerned about ahead of tomorrow's poll is confrontation between pro and anti-government groups.
This country does not belong to only a tyranny family.
The trial here could take up to 3 months, so the Al Jazeera lawyers are seeking provisional release for Peter Greste and his colleagues.
It's with mass rallies like this that Prabowo Subianto is building momentum towards the July 9 poll.
We are a nation of lifters, not leaners.
Beijing would be also looking at this crowd and wondering, what are we going to do about it?
These men waged war so that we might know peace. They sacrificed so that we might be free. They fought in hopes of a day when we no longer need to fight.
These people are suddenly alive with the possibility of an independent Scotland.
So it's been compelling evidence and it's only day one, witness number one. This trial is set down for 3 weeks.
Rolf Harris denies ever having inappropriately touched underage girls.
The demonstrations show no sign of stopping. People are now fighting just for their right to peacefully protest.
Why do we want it?
There is no sign of compromise anywhere, and the tension is getting worse.
We want them back alive because they are tomorrow.
There have been scores of airstrikes now since Israel resumed its military operations in Gaza.
This is what the Egyptian government wants to see, a large turnout and lines in polling places like this one in Cairo.
With news that Schapelle Corby's parole application is now on the desk of the Justice Minister, the chance of her walking out of these doors is now greater than it's ever been.
Past 24 hours, this city has been shaken. But whatever the test, we will face it head on.
If you're 5-0 up, stand up. Farewell on grandstand. What a way to finish.
I'm going to shirt front, Mr. Putin.
Tonight, Tasmanians have voted for change.
We're governed for every single South Australian.
And if China and the United States can agree on this, then the world can agree on this. We can get this done.
I will be resigning the position.
They've won it. Said Germany are world champions.
How unbelievable to be able to dare to land on a comet.
It's just unbelievable. We've tasted so long and how it's happening.
As we celebrate the start of each new year, we can never be sure where the year will take us. Stories that may seem insignificant will end up dominating the headlines, and events we never saw coming will take us by surprise.
Lost contact with Suva Air Traffic Control at 2:40 a.m. this morning.
In the dark of night on the 8th of March, a routine commercial flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing would disappear from radar. Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 would quickly go on to become one of the most puzzling aviation mysteries the world had seen.
The Malaysian airline flight MH370 was there 1 minute and seemingly gone the next. There was no distress signal or any warning of trouble from the pilots.
There is no real precedent
for a situation like this. The plane vanished.
With no trace of the plane or the 239 people it was carrying, the search spread over vast areas of Asia and the Indian Ocean.
On the possibility of hijack, we are not ruling any possibility. However, it's important to state that our main concern is to focus our effort in finding the missing aircraft.
For the families, it's an excruciating wait for news. Here at Kuala Lumpur Airport, where the plane took off almost a week ago, is a tribute wall where so many of the messages seem to hold out hope that the passengers and crew will be found alive.
Efforts to find MH370 were surrounded by chaos and confusion. Days became weeks as bewildered authorities stumbled from one news conference to the next.
Before I take any questions, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to clear up a few issues. I would like to refer to news reports suggesting that the aircraft may have continued flying for some time after last contact. As Malaysian Airlines will confirm shortly, those reports are inaccurate.
The search zone just keeps on getting bigger. It now stretches across 27,000 square nautical miles.
It took almost a month, but the focus eventually shifted to an area off the coast of Western Australia.
New and credible information has come to light in relation to the search for Malaysia Airlines flight MH370.
AMSA continues to hold grave concerns for the passengers and crew on board, and I must emphasise that these objects may be very difficult to locate and they may not be related to the search.
This is a remote location, far from any possible landing sites. It is therefore with deep sadness and regret that I must inform you that according to this new data, flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean.
To this day, the plane and all those on board have not been found. Over 150,000 square kilometres of seafloor have been searched in the 10 months since the disappearance. And still, the location of the plane and all those on board remains a mystery. But this would not be the only disaster for Malaysian Airlines in 2014. 5 months later, another shocking event would unfold in the skies over Ukraine.
Here in Kiev, Ukrainians have woken wondering about the future of their country after the bloodiest day of violence on the streets of the capital in decades.
The Cold War may be over, but the fault lines that run between Ukraine and Russia broke wide open in 2014. It began in February. Thousands gathered in Kiev's main square. A revolution was underway.
Many people have died here.
Yes.
That could happen to you.
Yeah, it can happen, but it's my decision. I want to make a better life, and if I will die, so life is life.
Despite the very real fear of a serious injury or even worse, these people say they are going nowhere, they are rebuilding, they are going to protect this place until the president resigns.
Sparked by moves to shift Ukraine away from the European Union and towards Moscow, the protests would eventually force the flight and subsequent impeachment of President Viktor Yanukovych.
Is this the end of the president?
He is to resign immediately if he wants to save his life.
This is the moment these people have heard that the president has resigned. This is what they've been demanding. This is what they've been waiting for months for. Finally, they see they now have victory.
But the revolution was only the beginning. Before the month was out, attention swung towards the region of Crimea. Pro-Russian forces quickly took strategic positions and infrastructure across the peninsula. Reports suggested they were armed with Russian weapons. It quickly turned from a regional skirmish into an international diplomatic crisis.
I expect Russia to be transparent about these activities, and I urge them not to take any steps that could be misinterpreted.
Every country should respect the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Ukraine. Russia has made that commitment, and it's important that Russia keeps its word. The world will be watching.
The war in Ukraine would rumble away in the background for many months before once again it'd be thrust back into the headlines and brought right to our doorstep. In February, a drama that has captured attention in Australia for a decade came to an end. And as with every step of the Schapelle Corby story, it was full of tension, emotion and a whole lot of media.
The Bali Tribune here, it has a picture this morning of Schapelle Corby on the front page, and it's calling it the finale of the Corby Show.
To Schapelle's freedom!
Under her parole conditions, Schapelle Corby cannot leave Indonesia until 2017. And while one legal drama was ending, another was beginning. The trial of Oscar Pistorius drew the international media's focus in 2014, a courtroom drama that played out on live TV.
And I sat over Riva and I cried. And I don't know how long. I don't know how long I was there for. She was everything.
As he sat here in the court listening, he must have been reliving those moments when he was trying to comprehend just what he'd done.
On September the 12th, Pistorius was found guilty of culpable homicide and one firearm-related charge, and sentenced to a maximum of 5 years in jail. State prosecutors are appealing against the ruling, and the case will go in front of a Supreme Court panel next year. On the other side of the world, another celebrity was also facing court. This time it was Australian entertainer Rolf Harris, charged with 12 counts of indecent sexual assault.
Rolf Harris sat quietly in the dock as the prosecution portrayed him as a serial sex offender.
The charges dated back to a period between 1969 and 1986, involving 4 victims who were aged between 8 and 19 at the time. At the end of June, Rolf Harris arrived at court for sentencing.
Rolf Harris used his status and position as a world-famous children's entertainer to sexually assault young girls over a period spanning 18 years.
18 months after he was first questioned by British police, Rolf Harris leaves this court a convicted man.
Rolf Harris was found guilty on all 12 counts and sentenced to 5 years and 9 months in prison. The surrogacy industry has been big business in Thailand. a trade that most people knew of but gave little thought to. That's until one Australian couple made the choice to leave a child behind.
I felt sorry for the boy. It was like, this is adults' fault. And who is he to have to endure something like this, even though it's not his fault? Why does he have to be abandoned when the other baby has it easy? And he has to endure all this difficulty like this.
After the story broke, donations to Baby Gammy raised more than $250,000. Thailand banned surrogate babies from leaving the country with their parents. Hundreds of couples have been affected. Political upheaval rarely seems to be far away in Thailand, and once again it boiled over on the streets of Bangkok in 2014.
This is the show of force the government has resisted for weeks. On the streets across Bangkok, 25,000 police have descended.
If they don't turn around and be with the people, let them be wrapped in hell.
By May, President Yingluck Shinawatra and 9 other senior ministers had been removed from power by a constitutional court. Other members of their own party replaced them. But it was an uneasy resolution that didn't satisfy protesters on the streets. On the evening of May the 22nd, armed forces assumed control, formally launching a coup d'etat. Army leaders have promised an election will be held, though they refuse to lay out any timetable. Where Thailand might be synonymous with street protests, Hong Kong is not. But in 2014, a massive outpouring of public disquiet would spill over in one of the region's economic hubs.
We won't go home. We won't. Not only me, all of us here won't go home.
It became known as the Umbrella Revolution. Thousands blocked Hong Kong's main arteries, protesting against proposed electoral reforms by the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. The more pressure authorities applied to break up the protest, the more the protest grew. At its peak, more than 100,000 people were on the streets.
This has been the order of the night. Scuffles keep breaking out between both camps, and there's a lot of tension.
Deadlines came and went. The numbers would slowly dissipate, but it took until mid-December, nearly 3 months after the protests first began, for authorities to clear the last of the demonstration sites. For Scotland, a decision on the country's future was made at the ballot box. For much of the year, the referendum on Scottish independence seemed a foregone conclusion. But as the election drew closer, the prospect of a divided United Kingdom seemed a real possibility.
Around 4 million people are eligible to vote in the referendum. Their decision could dramatically affect not just the future of this country, but of the whole of the United Kingdom.
It would be the end of a country that launched the Enlightenment, that abolished slavery, that drove the Industrial Revolution, that defeated fascism. The end of a country that people around the world respect and admire. The end of a country that all of us call home.
In the end, the no vote won, Scotland choosing to remain part of Great Britain.
I accept that verdict of the people, and I call on all of Scotland to follow suit in accepting the democratic verdict of the people of Scotland.
It was the highest voter turnout at any referendum or election since universal suffrage was granted in the UK. Two of the world's biggest democracies also went to the polls. More than 500 million people voted in India, electing Narendra Modi as the new PM. And in Indonesia, a former furniture salesman beat a retired military general to become only the third directly elected president in that country's history.
As far as Joko Widodo's supporters are concerned, they have a winner. A humble candidate who would come to office with clean hands and a new way of doing business as he runs Indonesia for 5 years.
On the morning of April the 16th, a South Korean ferry carrying 476 people, many of them school students, capsized between Incheon and Jeju. Initially told by the crew to remain in their cabins, many passengers filmed themselves on mobile phones, unaware of the dangerous situation that was unfolding around them. As the ferry sank, hundreds jumped into the icy waters. 172 people were rescued, 304 others died. The captain and 3 crew members were charged with murder. In July, the owner of the shipping company was found dead in a field south of Seoul. More than 12 months ago, in the West African nation of Guinea, doctors diagnosed the first case in an outbreak of a disease that would become an epidemic in 2014, Ebola.
I am declaring the current outbreak of Ebola virus disease a public health emergency of international concern.
It'd take many more months before most of the world would become aware of the deadly virus as it threatened to spread across the globe.
You start to get a sense of the rapid escalation now we're seeing of the virus.
Many use the analogy of a fire burning out of control to describe this unprecedented Ebola outbreak. Indeed, it is a fire. It is a fire straight from the pit of hell.
There have been more than 18,000 suspected cases and nearly 7,000 deaths from the disease, but the rate of infection is slowing. For the United States, 2014 was marked by a series of race-related riots. In August, the fatal shooting of Michael Brown by a police officer would spark a week of civil unrest in Ferguson, Missouri.
Get him out of the car! Get him out of the car! We have had enough!
Why are you out here tonight?
I'm out here supporting Mike Brown and all the rest of my brothers executed by police brutality.
Anger quickly built as police were accused of using a heavy-handed approach towards peaceful protesters and the media.
The militarization of the response became more of the problem than any solution.
This is the scene here in Ferguson tonight. A steady stream of cars driving past, all honking their horns in solidarity. People on the edges of the road with their hands in the air calling out, "Hands up, don't shoot."
In November, a grand jury decided not to indict the police officer who shot Michael Brown. It only fueled sentiment in America and led to more unrest in Ferguson and demonstrations that would ripple across the country. In June, a series of incidents between Israelis and Palestinians in Gaza spiralled into one of the worst outbreaks of fighting in that region in recent years. Rocket fire from militants in Gaza and Israeli airstrikes on the territory displaced almost 500,000 people.
The people of Gaza remain defiant. They've seen this many times before.
We are prepared to continue and intensify our operation to protect our people.
It was the first time Israel had launched a ground invasion since 2009.
The rights of Palestinians, even their children, are wholesale denied, and it's appalling.
The fighting lasted for 7 weeks, punctuated by a series of failed ceasefires. More than 2,200 people died. Back in June, a Sunni militant group called Islamic State began an offensive through northern Iraq, aiming to capture the capital city of Baghdad and overthrow the Shiite government of Nouri al-Maliki.
I share alarm about the future of Iraq, and we are developing a full range of options to help stabilize the region.
The extremists' involvement in Syria in the early part of this year and the declaration of a worldwide caliphate raised the group's profile. The brutal beheadings of foreign hostages would be what finally drew a direct response from Western nations. In September, the focus would fall on a village on the Turkish border, Kobani. As the fighting intensified in the Middle East, so did the allure of the call to arms. Increasingly, young men and women from Western countries were heading to the Middle East to take up arms alongside the IS fighters. Kobani is still a city under siege, but the tide has turned against Islamic State fighters in the region. The battle goes on. Throughout the year, fighting in Ukraine continued. Pro-Russian separatists and Ukrainian loyalists were battling for control of Crimea. It was a story that had shifted off the front page until one morning in July, when a war on the other side of the world would hit home.
We received notification from the Ukrainian air traffic control that we lost contact with the aircraft MH17 at 14:15 GMT.
In the centre of a war zone, the crash site was difficult to get to. There were reports of looting and destruction of evidence. When reporters did make it to the site, the scenes were shocking. Debris was spread across fields and local towns, evidence of so many innocent lives lost.
If you look out here, it's a vast area of kilometres, square kilometres, and the likelihood is we'll never find everyone that was caught up in this terrible, terrible incident.
The full MH17 passenger manifest has now been released, detailing the names of those on board and their seat numbers. A grim read made even more horrifying because 80 of those names are of children and 3 of infants.
Did they lock hands with their loved ones? Did they hold their children close to their hearts? Did they look each other in the eyes one final time in a wordless goodbye? We will never know.
The final Australian victims were brought home at the start of December. A final accident report is expected in August 2015.